I've been camping most of my adult life, and I've learned that when something feels wrong in the woods, it usually is. It might not be supernatural. It might not even be dramatic, but it's usually something. This happened in October of 2021 in the Great Smoky Mountains. I had taken a week off from work and planned a solo trip on the Tennessee side, away from the heavier tourist traffic near Gatlinburg. I wasn't deep into untouched wilderness, but I was far enough out that once the sun went down, there weren't going to be casual hikers passing by. I had reserved a backcountry site that required about a 7-mile hike in. I've done longer. It wasn't extreme. The weather was good, mid-50s at night, dry and quiet. That time of year is usually ideal. Fewer people, less humidity, fewer bugs. The first day was normal. The hiking was steady but manageable. I passed maybe 3 groups total on the way. Once I got to my designated campsite, it was empty. Just a small cleared patch, a fire ring, and a metal cable for hanging food. Standard setup. I pitched my tent about 20 yards from the tree line. The clearing wasn't large, maybe 40 feet across. Trees surrounded it completely. Thick forest on all sides. Once you stepped past the clearing, it was dense Appalachian woods. That first evening was uneventful. I cooked, hung my food bag, and sat by the fire until it burned down. Around 10 p.m., I turned in. I'm not one of those campers who stays up late. When it gets dark out there, you sleep. I woke up sometime after midnight, not because of a sound exactly, more like that feeling when your body decides something is off. I stayed still and listened. It was quiet. No wind, no rain, just normal night sounds. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then I saw it. Through the thin mesh panel near the top of my tent, I could see part of the tree line. The moon was out enough to give a faint outline of the woods. There was someone standing just inside the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A branch, a shadow. But it didn't move with the wind. It was upright, human-shaped, about 6 feet tall from what I could tell. It wasn't close to my tent. Maybe 25 or 30 feet away, just beyond the clearing. Standing there, I didn't move. I just watched. After about 30 seconds, I convinced myself it had to be another camper who wandered off the trail. Maybe someone needed help. Maybe they were just looking around. So I said, "Hey." No response. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't step back. I grabbed my headlamp and turned it on, aiming directly at the spot. There was nothing there, just trees. I sat there for a while after that, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I eventually told myself it was fatigue, light playing tricks, first night nerves. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I checked the edge of the clearing where I'd seen the figure. No clear footprints. The ground was mostly leaves and roots. It would have been hard to see anything unless the soil was disturbed. I didn't notice anything obvious. The second day was normal. I hiked a nearby trail loop, came back, cooked dinner. But that night, I made sure to position my chair facing the tree line. Around 9:30 p.m., while I was sitting by the fire, I saw movement again. This time it wasn't subtle. A person stepped from behind one tree to another, staying just inside the woods. I stood up immediately and said, "You okay out there?" The movement stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the spot. For half a second I saw him. It was definitely a man, mid-sized build, dark clothing, no backpack that I could see. He was turned sideways, like he didn't want to face me directly. Then he stepped back behind the tree and disappeared. I walked toward the tree line with the flashlight raised. I didn't go all the way in. I'm not stupid, but I got close enough to see deeper into the woods. Nothing. No snapping branches. No footsteps retreating. No voice. Just stillness. I backed up slowly and went back to my fire. I didn't sleep much that night. The third morning, I hiked toward a ranger outpost that was about 4 miles from my site. I wasn't panicked, but I wanted to mention it. The ranger on duty was a man in his early 50s. Calm, straightforward. I told him I thought someone had been watching my campsite at night. He didn't look surprised. He asked what section I was in. When I told him the site number, he nodded slowly. He said, "We've had issues with long-term squatters in that area. Apparently, there are people who live deep in certain parts of the Smokies off-grid. Not common, but it happens. They build hidden shelters far from marked trails. They avoid contact. Some have been there for years." He said most of them just want to be left alone, but they sometimes watch campsites to make sure campers don't wander too close to their setups. That didn't make me feel better. I asked if it was dangerous. He said it depends on the person. Most of the time, no. But they don't like being approached. I considered packing up and leaving that day. But I had 2 more nights booked, and part of me didn't want to be scared off. So I went back. That evening, I didn't light a fire. I sat inside my tent with my headlamp off and waited. Around 11 p.m., I saw him again. Same spot, standing in the tree line. This time, I didn't call out. I just watched. After a few minutes, he moved slowly to his right, circling the clearing, staying inside the woods, never stepping into open space. He made a full half circle around my camp over the next 20 minutes, watching. That's when it shifted from strange to threatening. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was checking the perimeter. I reached for my phone, even though I knew there was no signal. Then I heard something else, a soft metallic sound from near the food cable. I turned my head slightly. He wasn't in the tree line anymore. He was in the clearing, standing beneath the food cable, looking up at my bag. I froze. He reached up and touched the hanging line, not pulling it, just testing it. I shouted, louder than I meant to, "Back up." He looked toward my tent. For the first time, I saw his face clearly in the moonlight. He wasn't young, probably late 40s. Beard, dirty clothes, eyes locked directly on me. No expression, just calm. Then he stepped backward into the woods and disappeared again. I didn't sleep at all after that. At first light, I packed everything. I didn't cook, didn't eat, just packed. Before leaving, I walked to the tree line one more time. About 15 feet inside the woods, partially hidden under branches, I found something. A makeshift lean-to shelter. Fresh, not old, not abandoned. Inside were food wrappers, a tarp, and a sleeping bag. He hadn't been wandering through. He had been living right there, within sight of the campsite, watching whoever booked it. I didn't go back to that section of the Smokies again. I've camped plenty since then, but never alone in that region. Because what stuck with me wasn't the fear of violence. It was the realization that someone had been there the entire time, close enough to step into my camp whenever he wanted, and choosing not to. My name is Daniel Harper, and in the summer of 2019, my wife Melissa and I decided to celebrate our 5th anniversary by doing something we used to love before life got busy. We went backcountry camping. We had both grown up hiking in Pacific Northwest. We weren't reckless. We understood basic wilderness safety. Bear canisters, food storage, route planning, leaving trip details with family. We did all of that. We chose Olympic National Park because it gave us the kind of isolation we were looking for without being extreme. The section we picked required a long hike in, about 9 miles from the nearest road access. Not technical, just steady elevation and thick forest. The kind of place where once you're set up, you don't expect random people wandering through your camp. We arrived on a Monday afternoon. The ranger station confirmed we were the only registered campers assigned to that particular backcountry zone for the next 4 nights. There were other sites miles away along different trails, but no one sharing our immediate area. That mattered to us. We reached the campsite around 4:30 p.m. It was a small clearing near a river bend, dense forest on 3 sides, open view of the water on the 4th. There was an established fire ring, a food cable, and 2 relatively flat spots for tents. We set up one tent. We always shared. It kept things simple. Everything felt normal, quiet, peaceful. We cooked dinner, filtered water from the river, and sat talking until the light faded. That first night was uneventful. The second day, we planned a long day hike to a waterfall about 6 miles from camp. We packed light: water, snacks, first aid, bear spray. We secured our food in the bear canister and locked it to the food cable as instructed. We zipped the tent closed. Nothing valuable left inside except sleeping bags and clothes. We were gone about 7 hours. When we came back, the first thing I noticed was that our camp looked slightly off. I couldn't explain it immediately. Nothing dramatic. Nothing knocked over. The tent was still standing. The canister was still locked. But Melissa stopped walking before I did. She said, "Did you move the chairs?" We had brought 2 lightweight folding camp chairs. I remembered leaving them angled toward the river. Now they were facing each other. I stood there for a moment, replaying it in my head. I said maybe we'd left them like that without realizing. It had been early evening when we set up. Maybe we'd shifted them before bed. Melissa didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. I checked the tent. Zipper still closed. Inside, our sleeping bags were where we left them, but my backpack was leaning against the opposite side wall. I always keep it near the door. It's habit. I told myself I might have kicked it in my sleep. Maybe when we were packing for the hike that morning, I'd shifted it without thinking. Melissa said nothing for a while. Then she said something that stuck with me. "It feels like someone stood here." I asked what she meant. She said, "Like someone was in the middle of the clearing, just standing here." That night, we didn't talk about it much. We locked the food canister again and went to bed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. I didn't hear anything specific. It was more the kind of alertness you feel when your body senses something out of place. I listened. The river was steady. No footsteps. No voices. I almost went back to sleep when I heard a faint movement outside the tent. Not an animal brushing against fabric. Something slower. Intentional. A footstep on gravel. I reached over and gently shook Melissa awake. She whispered, "What?" I told her I thought someone was outside. We both stayed completely still. There was another step. It circled slightly, like someone walking around the tent at a measured pace. I grabbed my headlamp and clicked it on, shining it through the thin tent wall. Nothing visible. The footsteps stopped. We waited for several minutes. No more movement. I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out with the headlamp and bear spray. The clearing was empty. The tree line was dark and still. I walked a slow circle around camp. No visible person. No obvious footprints. The ground was packed dirt with scattered pine needles. Not ideal for seeing impressions. I came back inside. Melissa didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, we debated leaving, but we rationalized it. Olympic is wildlife. Raccoons can make odd noises. Even deer can step heavily enough to sound human in the dark. We decided to stay. That day, we chose a shorter hike, just a few miles upstream. We were gone about 4 hours. When we returned, it was no longer subtle. The tent zipper was halfway open, not fully unzipped, just enough to create a gap. We both stopped walking at the same time. I knew for a fact we had zipped it completely closed. I approached slowly. Inside, our sleeping bags had been unfolded, not tossed, not rifled through, laid open, side by side, like someone had inspected them. My backpack was unzipped, nothing missing, but the contents had been shifted. Melissa's small toiletry pouch was sitting on top of her bag instead of inside it. The food canister was still locked and hanging, untouched. Whoever had been there wasn't trying to steal. They were examining. Melissa said we needed to leave immediately. I agreed. We packed fast. Faster than was probably smart. As I was collapsing the tent, I noticed something near the tree line, about 20 feet into the woods, partially concealed by brush. There was a narrow path that didn't match the main trail we'd used. It wasn't an official trail. It looked like something made by repeated foot traffic. Thin, subtle, and it led away from our camp at an angle that kept the clearing partially visible. I followed it for about 10 yards. Then I saw it. A small makeshift shelter built from branches and a dark tarp stretched low between two trees. It was positioned so that whoever was inside could see our campsite through a gap in the foliage. Inside the shelter were recent items: an empty water bottle, food wrappers, a rolled sleeping pad. This wasn't abandoned. This was current. Melissa called my name sharply from camp, and I stepped back immediately. We finished packing and left within 20 minutes. About 2 miles down the trail, we encountered a ranger doing routine patrol. I told him everything. He listened carefully and asked specific questions about what had been moved and when. Then he told us something I didn't expect. He said they had ongoing issues with individuals who live semi-permanently in the deeper sections of the park without permits. Some avoid contact entirely. Some become territorial around certain areas. He didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. We may have set up camp in someone else's unofficial living space. He took notes about the location and said they would investigate. Melissa and I cut the trip short and drove home that same day. For weeks afterward, I couldn't shake one detail. Nothing was stolen, nothing destroyed. The person who entered our tent could have taken wallets, gear, anything small and valuable. Instead, they opened our sleeping bags. They moved our chairs. They walked around us in the dark. It felt less like theft and more like curiosity or assessment. What unsettles me most is that the second night, when we heard those footsteps, whoever it was close enough to touch the tent, close enough to unzip it if they wanted. And they waited until we were gone to step inside, which means they were watching long enough to know our patterns. We haven't done a multi-day backcountry trip since. Not because of wildlife, not because of weather, but because somewhere in those woods, someone was living close enough to our camp to observe us for 2 days straight without us ever seeing their face. And that realization is harder to forget than anything else. The first sign that we weren't alone wasn't the footprints. It was the feeling that someone else was matching our pace. In October of 2020, my friend Cole Ramirez and I went on what was supposed to be a 5-day elk hunting trip in western Montana. We had been planning it for almost a year. We weren't beginners. We both grew up hunting in Colorado and Idaho. We knew how to navigate, how to track, how to stay safe in bear country. We also knew that once you get far enough off marked trails, you rarely see other people. That was the point. We hiked in nearly 12 miles from the nearest Forest Service road. It took most of the day with full packs and rifles. The terrain was uneven but manageable. Dense timber broken up by small clearings and long ridgelines. No established campground. Just open backcountry where you're allowed to disperse camp. We chose a flat area near a shallow creek with decent visibility in 3 directions. The fourth side was thick forest climbing uphill. Not ideal, but workable. We set up 2 small tents about 15 feet apart and hung our food between trees about 40 yards downwind. Standard procedure in grizzly territory. The first day was normal. We glassed a distant ridge, saw nothing worth pursuing. Came back to camp before dark. Ate freeze-dried meals. Talked about work, family, regular life. That night, I slept hard. The second morning is when I noticed it. We headed out before sunrise, hiking northwest along a ridge we hadn't explored yet. About an hour in, I saw a boot print in the mud near a small runoff stream. It wasn't ours. I crouched and studied it. Fresh, sharp edges, defined tread pattern. Cole came up beside me and said, "That's not mine." It wasn't mine either. We hadn't crossed that section before. I was sure of it. I told myself it wasn't impossible. Other hunters used the backcountry. Even if we hadn't seen anyone at the trailhead, someone could have come in from a different direction. Still, it bothered me. The print was headed roughly parallel to the direction we were walking, not crossing our path. Following the same general line, we continued moving, but I started paying closer attention. Within the next mile, I spotted 3 more prints. Each time, they appeared just off to the side of where we were moving, not directly in our track, not directly ahead, to the right, slightly higher on the slope, like someone staying out of our direct path, but keeping pace. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to escalate a normal situation into paranoia. Around midday, we stopped to glass a meadow below us. As we sat there, I scanned the opposite ridge with binoculars. That's when I saw it. A brief reflection. Not sunlight on rock. Not water. A small, steady glint, like light hitting glass. Binoculars. I adjusted focus. There was definitely someone on that ridge, partially concealed by timber, prone or crouched, watching our direction. I lowered my binoculars slowly. Cole noticed my face change and asked what I saw. I handed him the binoculars and pointed. He scanned for about 10 seconds before muttering, "I see him." The figure didn't wave, didn't stand up, didn't move openly, just stayed there. We waited. After about a minute, the person shifted backward and disappeared behind the tree line. That's when the situation stopped feeling casual. If it was another hunter, why hide? Why not signal? Why not call out? Montana backcountry hunters don't usually play games. If you run into someone, you acknowledge it. It's safer that way. We packed up and headed back toward camp earlier than planned. On the way down, we found more boot prints. Now they were closer, not right beside ours, but no longer high up the slope, within 20 feet. That night, we didn't build a fire. We ate cold food and sat quietly. Around 10 p.m., I heard it, a faint crunch of leaves uphill. Cole heard it too. We both turned toward the dark tree line. Another step. Slow, measured, not an animal pattern. I've hunted long enough to know the difference between wildlife movement and human weight distribution. This was deliberate. Cole whispered, "Bear." I shook my head. It paused when we paused. It resumed when we shifted. I stood up and said loudly, "Camp's occupied." Silence. Then a single step backward. Then nothing. We stayed awake in shifts that night. The next morning, we checked the perimeter. About 30 yards uphill from camp, we found boot prints. Standing prints. Someone had stopped there, faced downhill toward our tents, and stood long enough to leave deep impressions. We decided to move camp, not back toward the trailhead, deeper. Part of me didn't want to retreat. It felt like giving ground. We packed up and moved about 2 miles southeast into thicker timber, where the terrain became more uneven, harder to approach quietly. By mid-afternoon, we had a new camp established. For a few hours, it felt calm again, until we saw smoke. Thin, faint, rising from a ridge west of us, close enough that it couldn't be miles away. Someone had made a fire. We hadn't seen any other vehicles at the access road when we arrived. No other gunshots in the area. No sign of a legal hunting party. That evening, as light faded, I stepped away from camp to relieve myself and happened to glance back toward our tents. That's when I saw him, Clearly for the first time. He was standing about 50 yards out, partially shielded by a pine trunk, rifle in hand, not raised, just held, watching. He wasn't dressed in standard blaze orange, just dark clothing, camouflage that didn't match any common brand pattern I recognized. I locked eyes with him for maybe 2 seconds. Then he stepped behind the tree and disappeared. I walked back into camp calmly and told Cole we were leaving at first light. We didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., something hit the side of Cole's tent. Not hard enough to collapse it, but hard enough to make the fabric ripple. Cole came out immediately with his rifle ready. Nothing visible. Then we heard footsteps moving quickly downhill away from camp. Human footsteps. We didn't chase. At dawn, we packed faster than I ever have in my life. As we were finishing, I found something near where Cole's tent had been struck. A spent rifle casing. Not ours. We hadn't fired a shot since arriving. It wasn't fresh from that moment, but it hadn't been there the night before. Someone had been close enough to our camp to drop it intentionally, or accidentally. Either option was bad. We hiked out in silence, scanning constantly. About 3 miles from the trailhead, we found something that still bothers me. A small cluster of trees where the bark had been deliberately cut away in narrow strips, at eye level, facing the trail, marking it. Not something wildlife would do. Not something a casual camper would do. It looked like a trail marker system, unofficial. We reported everything to the local Forest Service office. When we reached cell service, they took notes, asked questions, promised to look into it. We never heard back. I've hunted remote land before and after that trip, but I've never again felt that specific kind of pressure. The kind where you realize someone else is out there, armed, skilled enough to move quietly, and choosing not to make contact. I don't know what his intention was. Maybe he was just territorial. Maybe he thought we were in his spot. Maybe he didn't want witnesses to whatever he was really doing out there. What I do know is this. He watched us for 3 days. He tracked our movement. He approached our camp at night. And at some point while we were sleeping, he stood close enough to throw something against a tent. If he had decided to raise that rifle instead of holding it at his side, no one would have heard the shot except the mountains. And that's the part that still stays with me.